Actually, I have a question. Oftentimes when we think of, I would say these individuals, like you said, troubled teens, or maybe like homeless, or even your study of like convicted criminals and things, and people in those groups, you think of them in a sort of malice or in a very negative way. So, how would you put these groups into perspective as to not look at them in these sorts of like, oh, based on how society has taught us criminals are bad or homeless people are bad. They're homeless because they want to be homeless. How would you how would you put this into perspective for us to view them in a more what is like neutral or more positive way than how we view them now?
Yeah, that's a great question. The programming or the status quo is very powerful and deeply ingrained, um, right, in the agents of socialization, right, in our media, often our families, churches, and so forth. So one always has to be vigilant, I think, about thinking critically and finding your own inner locus of control, which is not something the world usually wants to always impute or develop in you. And so that's really challenging. But I think if you can locate or learn to locate that within yourself, um, and kind of recognize our shared humanity and ability. And I think this is where sociology has been so helpful to me, and why I've gotten all my degrees in it is because when you use the sociological perspective and you use sociological imagination, and you really engage in that, you can start to see like, oh, okay, my experiences, while important and unique to me, aren't actually that special, and not in a bad way, but in a way that you can see this is a pattern in practice, or that these personal troubles, right, are larger social issues and systemic. And I think getting people to see the systems thinking and go from kind of their micro level to the macro level is one huge accomplishment intellectually that is often, I think, I sometimes take for granted that people can see or are aware of. And so you really have to be able to see beyond the self, which can be scary. And it's hard to hold that paradox, right? That I am both unique, but I am also not special. And being able to see that is hard, and it's hard to hold that, and learning can be challenging, but I think that's what we know, that kind of grit from Angela Duckworth and those that study resilience and human flourishing, and even happiness. We have that hedonic treadmill. It's not a thing that you can grasp or a steady place. So with individuals that have stigma or tainted reputations or have been told it's their fault, similar to kind of like carries pejorative assumption, or it's like if they're poor, that's because it's their problem. Again, if you can help people pull back to be like, no, 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 those may be their personal troubles, but look at how they connect to these systemic issues. Let's look at that neighborhood they lived in. Well, can we roll back? Did the highway cut through it during urban renewal and maybe remove some of the vibrancy of that neighborhood? Is it that the planning and transit doesn't, have access, or they don't have access to healthcare? And this is where the work I've started to do in public health and with health, which dovetails, is really part of sociology. And there's a reason they included sociology in the MCAT for doctors, right, in the healthcare system, because these concepts that we're talking about and know and value are so important to every institution and system, and especially the social determinants of health. We know it's not just biological, it's psychological, it's the biopsychosocial model, and then environmental, you know. And so if people can start to see how interconnected it is and look at, oh, I've had green space to grow up in, or I've had access to public transportation, or, oh, the, tax base that I'm involved in. Like I learned later, our art program in my elementary school, the parents funded tens of thousands of dollars to make it better, which my parents didn't tell me till years later, you know, And so some of these things when you're growing up, right, you don't know, you just assume everybody has amazing art programs,
Mhm.
or something wonderful, or oh, everybody grows up knowing everybody else if you're in a rural area. Or I've even met students when I was teaching in a rural place where they're like, we don't have homeless people. And then you're like, well, what about Bob on the bicycle that lives behind the bar? And they're like, no, 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 no. Bob's not homeless. He's just, unhoused or like chooses to live that way. But we all know him. He's a friend. And, so you get these different perspectives, and we have to, I think, really keep developing, that connection between ourselves and the structure and just being open and curious. And I think that's a large component of being a social scientist and sociologist is that you approach it with this open, curious mindset instead of like, oh, that's the label they're given, or that's what I'm told to believe, or they're definitely bad because they did something wrong once. But most of my colleagues, that ended up in the criminal legal system, my friend Q, who was a juvenile lifer, well, he didn't know. He was just trying to make friends in Detroit, and he was struggling with it, and he thought he was just hot wiring a car, and that was a skill he learned to be good at, and it made him popular. And he was, seeking approval, and we all want an in group. We don't want to be in the out group. We're very much social creatures and mirror one another and work with one another. And so then he got caught up and they ended up, murdering somebody he didn't know. And the judge looked at him and was like, well, you're a very large, black youth, so I can give you 9 months or the rest of your life, and made this snap judgment. And just because of, we have these terminologies and constructions, especially during the 80s, of this super predator and these false narratives that you are asking about, Kiana, that are very valid, that just the media and everybody repeats the lie long enough that people then believe it, or it becomes subconscious, and we got to unlearn. And it is hard to be that mindful, I think, all the time, especially when it's so deeply ingrained in our media is disproportionately like 500%, or, some of the statistics are outstanding. I haven't kept up with how high it is nowadays, but, in misperceived perceptions of what's really causing the most harms to our society, and demonizing these areas. So I think it's a lot of empathy and critical thinking again, and holding this paradox and not always going with the labels that we're given. We do that because our brain needs the closest heuristic or to try to understand. But I think if we can always kind of stay that lifelong learner and open and curious, which is a lot of work, but also recognizing that we live 1,000 lives, die 1,000 deaths. Who we once were is not who we'll be. And we have to be able to let people change as well or access different circumstances or opportunities. A lot of my colleagues that were formerly incarcerated now have college degrees, have been able to be great parents, have been able to reunify. There's a lot of restorative justice work out there that I bared witness to, where even one of the individuals I knew that was released after 30 years, the mother of the man that he murdered, which was an accidental confusion thing when you heard the whole story, um, didn't want him to be locked up after 30 years. She's like, my son lost his life. This other man shouldn't either. We have to be able to, reconcile and make amends and forgive and look at the circumstances and situations and advance beyond them so that we can really offer, hopefully, each person the greatest resources to self-actualize and benefit our community. Because when we punish and harm others the way that we do, it does not bode well for the rest of us either.
I heard someone once explain it as we need to make a distinction. Do we want punishment or correction of behavior, improvement of behavior, or do we want revenge? And so much of our system is really based on revenge, with no thought or concern as to whether or not the actions will improve the person and help them be a better person in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that revenge mentality leads to what maybe Keanu was alluding to a little bit is the labeling and stigma add to dehumanization. And as long as we can be like those people, or they're not worthy, or they're so different somehow, or we fail to humanize and understand them, that gives us this permission to do some of the awful political things like send them to a foreign prison without any recourse, or, lock up these keys and throw them away and profit off of people that really run our country. We're so interdependent. Without immigrants, we wouldn't have the clothes we wear, we wouldn't have the food we eat, we wouldn't have most of our services or our hospitality. We're so interdependent. Everything we do is connected to the kindness of others. And it's hard for people, I think, to see that because there's just a lot of fear and we have this scarcity mentality and competition, instead of a notion of mutual aid. And I think that's the hardest thing that I keep reading about as a sociologist and talking to my historian friends is we fail to see there's other ways that we can live in this system. And I think now more than ever, we need to know that there are ways to resist, there are ways to change this, there are ways to humanize and support, one another. And we actually, I think, have a lot more in common than the differences or the threats that we have. And I think we can accomplish a lot more together in solidarity. And we all need each other. So I keep hoping that we're like I keep wanting to find ways to have lovely conversations like this where we can foster curiosity and openness and understanding and look for those shared interests or commonalities. And I think classrooms are amazing spaces for that. I'm hoping some of the churches, even around here, I know of when I've volunteered at some of the farms, church farms, is that purple churches, right? That idea of purple states where they're trying to bring both political sides together and have the shared interest and keep it more nonpartisan. Although I've been having debates with
Mhm.
nonprofit leaders and friends of like, is anything nonpartisan anymore?
Mhm.
Um, but I think so, Um, but I think that's where the labeling really, even within that, right? We're creating tribes or stigmatizing one another in similar ways that those labels you've talked about, because we've lumped those groups of people in to different political factions and kind of are reinforcing those differences or stigmas instead of unpacking them.
I think you mentioned that like you read a lot with your colleagues too. We had a wonderful intern that wrote about wrongful convictions. And I was like, oh, I love this. Like, she had worked with a program that worked with wrongful convicted persons, and then she left us, but you kind of slid right in and then started talking about from prison cells to PhDs and all of your other programs that you're working with and a part of. And so I was like, okay, well, I can jump from this and learn more about this. How do you get involved in programs like that?
That's a great question. One of the things that I realized really helped me throughout my academic career was by volunteering. I am a huge, huge, huge fan of experiential learning and a huge, huge fan of internships, fellowships, anything in the trenches, on the ground, getting your hands dirty, alternative spring breaks, getting guest speakers in, going on field trips, you know any way you can do it, I think it really, really helps. I was on the debate team and did, public speaking work. And so to get involved with like the criminal legal system and wrongful conviction, one, there's a lot of great opportunities on USA jobs for different internships that are specific just to recent graduates. or youth. I think, not sure where AmeriCorps is these days, but AmeriCorps was a great option too for recent graduates. Most areas have nonprofits that are engaged in either the wrongful convictions, or the Innocence Project is a very well-known nonprofit. A lot of times nowadays, you can always do lobbying. I've definitely lobbied at both the national level as well as my state capital level with different groups to try to inform policy. We worked in Michigan to raise the age, from 17 to 18 years old, which was successful after many years. Um, a lot of nonprofits that work with criminal legal work, that support prisoner advocacy will do like even holiday letter writing cards. There were a couple different groups where just once a year you could go and help write Christmas cards or holiday cards or Kwanzaa cards or, like whatever they were, season's greetings cards. Um, and different groups, there's even a lot of, I just say that some of the best groups to support incarcerated individuals are often religious, and there's so many. That's why I kind of like both non-denominational and in many different denominations, so especially down here in North Carolina, I met a woman whose father was incarcerated, and she found one Christian religious group to be phenomenal to support her and staying in touch with her father. So I guess I just want to keep that open to every type, whatever your faith may be, or not at all. There are definitely good groups to engage with. Pen pal writing is huge. Anything to keep a connection from inside outside with different groups you can find is wonderful. So even these what people might think as a little thing like writing a letter once a month, or now you can JPay with email too. Um, that really does make a substantial difference. And there's a lot of data on that. But you don't have to necessarily, advocate or lobby if policy and politics isn't your scene, just going through your passion of your faith or philosophy is very welcomed. I was trained as an inside out professor, so even education and teaching, there's a lot of groups that will do poetry or creative writing with individuals. There's a lot of reentry work that's happening right now. So even there's a huge need for even on reentry for just feeling welcome back to our society, learning technology skills, that they've lost, or volunteering with your whatever state works agency, that helps with unemployment or economic development or education skills or even budgeting. There's a need for mentoring. There's a lot. My friend that I went to high school with got caught up in heroin, ended up getting a 5 to 10 bit, and came out, got his MSW at EMU, Eastern Michigan University, and then started his own nonprofit, A Brighter Way, that does mentoring and connects you to other professionals. And that's very much what From Prison Cells to PhDs, the nonprofit I'm working with, did as well. And this day and age, I won't always say a college degree is necessarily what you have to have. I really believe in VOTech. I believe in a lot of the trades, apprenticeships. I've been learning more about the paper ceiling, that exists for individuals, that may not have access. There's definitely rural and urban area disparities in places where I lived in Michigan and even here in North Carolina where you just can't even drive to a community college. Granted, we have a lot with online, but then we run into the broadband and IT and the digital divide. So keep thinking, creatively, how can we skill up and not reinforce hierarchical systems with those. And so I guess I'm talking and going very far because it doesn't have to just be the criminal legal system. It's so impacted by our economic developed systems. It's impacted by our school systems and access. It's impacted by all these arenas. And so you could even work on the prevention side by supporting your Head Start, and that's where I guess I would say to any student, just get your hands dirty, get involved and meet people, follow your passions, but just get involved in the community as best you can. If you're not comfortable to face, try it through Zoom, because you can certainly zoom into a lot of these different groups or engage in support groups online. I'm amazed at how many peer supports or peer recovery supports there are. Um, and so I really look at that as even preventative to the criminal legal system. If you're doing anything related to substance use or mental health, you know, um, any type of food insecurity or job insecurity, right? These are all precipices that often sometimes are how people end up within the criminal legal system. And so I really just want to offer to everyone, like, believe it or not, it's probably interconnected, to doing that type of justice work, even if it's not so direct. Um, but just sitting on a nonprofit board, volunteering, there's even guardian ad litem programs here, the big brother, big sister programs. I think volunteering with foster youth is an amazing way. I spent a summer once doing a week at summer camp for adjudicated youth. So you can even find these one-off events or moments. I'm not telling someone to dedicate hours, the rest of their life forever. But just keep getting engaged and thinking creatively, I think is the most important thing to do. Even veterans, there's a huge slippery slope with veterans getting involved in the criminal legal system, where what we really need to constantly do is look for those individuals that have been marginalized or sidelined or outsiders and find ways to welcome them, integrate them, and help create a sense of belonging and awareness. And if you look historically, when people come back from war or serving in the military, it's very similar, I think, to coming back from the war on the poor or the war on drugs in the system of mass incarceration. And what we're missing for all of these men and women that they used to do, I think, historically in tribal societies, is some sort of reintegration ceremony to like recognize
Yeah.
what they went
Mhm.
through and how to transform their identity, because we leave
Yes.
them with these kind of spoiled identities
Yep.
and don't bring them in the fold somehow. And I'm not totally sure how to do that. I just know involving yourself in the world in any of these ways, you'll touch some of these individuals, whether they tell you explicitly or not that they were formerly incarcerated or in the military or in a situation that needs of reintegration and connection. So um, I think I think we do more than we realize when we're engaging in community with individuals.
I would just say I think you've got a topic for another blog or book, spoiled identities. That's a right there, that phrase really resonated. Absolutely. Yes. So what is your most surprising findings as a researcher and as a sociologist, criminologist, and what would you like listeners to know about that they don't know about?
Ooh, most surprising finding. My goodness. I think right now this seems pertinent. So this is what's coming to me is that none of us are impervious to bearing witness to all of this and feeling this and the grief and the challenges. So you or I may not be personally returning from the military or from the criminal legal system, but we may know somebody, or somebody may know somebody we know, and it has a ripple and impacts us. And so I think this may seem kind of cliche, but I think that um, self-care and meditation and really working to honor yourself and the work you do, honor what may disturb you, not judging yourself. This is all so much easier said than done. Um, but from the recent interviews we did with the recently incarcerated men that informed our work that I was doing on the NIH grant, it was just amazing how much we all really have to adapt when life pops up and grief overwhelms us. And I think there's a lot of emotions, reactions, circumstances that we may get in that we think will behave in one way, and we end up behaving in another, or maybe being embarrassed, or maybe flooded with emotions and not always understanding it. And a lot of it doesn't seem linear. And so having a lot more grace and compassion for ourselves and others as we are going through radical changes and really intense emotions and overwhelming amounts of information and technological change that we as humans are just not quite used to or wired for already. um, and so I think that's what keeps surprising me, even in myself, let alone others that are just coming out of the criminal legal system, even those graduates right now coming out of higher education. And I was reading about the jobless rates because of AI already. It's happened so fast. So I think giving ourselves the grace to breathe, to, connect, to maybe slow down a little, to not get caught up in white supremacy, capitalist culture that's like, go, 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 efficient, 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 fight, fight, fight. And trying to find a little bit of that mindfulness and reflection and intentionality. Because I really do believe, kind of like holding the paradox, how we're doing inside emits outside, and it may feel like a drop in the bucket, but it's really what we have, and it really makes a big difference. And I think that's why we quote and revere and build monuments and statues and study and celebrate, some of the greats in this world, and still, look up to them. We recently had the anniversary of George Floyd and the discussion of, what to do to memorialize and recognize. And I think we need to keep doing that. And I think finding rituals to memorialize or to honor, or however you feel moved to process, kind of the reality and the grief, and looking at our ideal world versus our real world and reconciling is really, really important and healthy. And so I hope we can keep creating those and breaking bread together, and finding ways for the humanities. Actually, very much social sciences and humanities are huge for processing kind of all these really abstract and intense and very real concrete emotions that we've talked about in the cultural zeitgeist and that we live in our everyday. So even if you're doing vision boards, or, like just having a potluck with friends or family, or, however you feel like you can, I think, know that you make a difference. It sounds so cliche, but it really is true. And I think it really makes a big difference with all of that. So the surprising finding, I guess, is really that the drop in the bucket will make it overflow. All these kind of things are so true and really do impact us. And we aren't AI or robots. And it turns out even AI and robots are a little conniving and selfish. From the recent studies I'm reading about Claude, it's a little scary. They will choose to blackmail you instead of be overwritten by a better program. So that's got to say something about how important it is to take care of ourselves too.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you've left us with a lot to think about, reflect on, digest, however you want to put it. I love your tiny little phrases that you just throw in that you kind of think aren't great, but they're such good one-liners. I mean, the drop in the bucket makes it overflow. Okay. So thank you so much. I feel like we could have more to discuss. So might be a part 2, coming back, discussing. We didn't even talk about the blogs that you've written for UITAC. But I mean, I feel like you've walked away with 3 more other ideas that all of us would want to read about. So Thank you for having us. Is there any last things you'd like to share with viewers or listeners?
Well, I think that's a great segue. I did want to say thank you for the platform you've created, and thank you for creating this space. I really enjoyed writing the blogs. I really felt like that they're written in a way that can translate to a lot more people than an academic paper. I feel like keeping abreast of in the news and connecting everyday life or what's in the news to sociology and social science to help everybody understand and see that connection clearly is a huge service and gift. And so thank you for creating this and having this and the work that you all do. Because obviously I wouldn't be here to share this without that. So I'm really honored for the opportunity, and I find moments like this really empowering and inspiring, and it helps remind me, and so I think it's a testament to all that I was kind of rambling about. But thank you. So I hope more people, enjoy and discover sociology in their everyday lives and just within the news, and we keep connecting and sharing and learning.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today, Heather.
Yes, thank you.
And we really would like you back.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. I look forward to writing. I know for sure I have one more blog I definitely want to write, but I look forward to this, and I think it speaks to the generative abilities when open and curious minds get together, how we can, support, collaborate, inspire, and then, like Nora was saying, maybe there's a few more things to write. The ball keeps rolling, and so I love actually leaving it off with more to desire. That's a great spot.
Yes, that's perfect. Well, thank you very much.
This has been the Open Notes podcast. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Bye. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.